Okay, let's take a look at the creation and updating of an activity. So we'll head back to VS Code, and we've got some code in here to deal with these operations. And at the moment we've got a handle or create or edit activity inside here, but we'll split these into two separate functions inside the store. We're not gaining much by making this a single function anyway. So let's head back to the activity store, and we'll add a couple more functions, and we'll create a create activity method, and this is going to be an arrow function, and it's going to be an async method again, and we're going to take the activity in as a parameter, which is of course going to be a type of activity, and we're going to set our loading flag to be true. And we'll need to set, because we're creating an activity here, what we'll also need to do is set the activity ID, and we're going to set this to a UUID, so it's a GUID that we're going to create. So we'll need to bring this in to our activity store. So we're just going to say import v4 as UUID from and UUID, and then we'll add a try catch block and pass in the error, and say console.log and pass in any error. We will come on to error handling before too long, I promise. And what we want to do here is say await agent.activities, and of course we're going to create and pass in the activity. Now we don't actually get anything back from our API from this apart from either a success or a failure. If we get a failure response, then that's going to be handled inside the catch block here. And if we're successful, then we're going to want to update our activities array inside our store. And we're going to do that inside an action. So we'll say run in action. And then we'll say this.activities, and we're going to push this new activity. So we'll say push activity. And then we're going to also select the activity as well, so that we display the details on the right hand side. So we'll say list.selected activity is equal to the activity, and we'll also turn off the edit mode as well and set that to false. And we also need to turn off the loading indicator. So we'll say list.loading equals false, and we also need to do the same for the catch block as well. But once again, because this is going to happen inside the next tick, we need to also add this to a run in action, and I'll just say list.loading equals false. So that's the create activity. We also need a fairly similar method for the update activity as well. And we'll make this an async method, and once again this is going to take an activity of type activity, and once again we'll just say list.loading equals true, and we'll say add the try catch block and say console.log and error. And inside the try block, then pretty straightforward, we're going to say await activities.update and pass in the activity here. And then we can do the run in action once again and add all our state updates. And what we'll do for this one, we'll say this.activities, and what we'll do here, we'll say filter, and we'll find the activity. So we'll say a goes to a.id that's not equal to the activity.id, and then we'll just say this.activities.push, and we'll pass in the activity as a way of updating the activity here. Another way to do this actually, because this doesn't feel like the cleanest way, I'm just going to remove that push from there. And we could say this.activities is equal to, and then we could use the spread operator and surround this in square brackets and add the ... And this is going to create a new array. It doesn't matter. I know we can mutate state in MobX, but we can also create a new array and replace the current array in our activities. And the spread operator does this. It's going to create a new array, And then what we can do is, after we've removed the activity based on that filter, is add a comma and pass in the activity. There's always more than one way to achieve the same goal. Once again, I'm going to say this.selected activity equals activity so that we display the activity on the right hand side. We'll set the edit mode equal to false, and we'll turn off the loading indicator as well. And then we'll add another running action. And inside here, we'll say list.loading equals false. And with these in place, what we'll do is we'll go back to our app.tsx and we can remove this function now to handle the create or edit activity. And we can also remove the create or edit inside here. And we should have a bunch of stuff that we can also remove from inside the app component as well. We're not using this local state anymore, so that can go. And also we can remove this from in here as well. And we'll come back and clean up the rest of this in here. We don't necessarily need to have our activities or our set activities here, but it does look like we're still using them in that handle delete. So I'll ignore that for now. And what we'll do is we'll head down to our activity dashboard. So we'll head over to the activity dashboard and we can remove this function that we're passing down and remove it from the destructured props there as well and move things up a bit. We can also remove this from our activity form as well. We don't need the submitting there either because we've got our loading indicator in our store as well, so that can also go. And let's go to our activity form and see what we can clean up from in there. So we can remove all of the props now from the form itself and remove them from the parameters here. And because our activity form, we're going to want to display the loading indicator that we get from our activity store. And that's an observable, don't forget. So inside here, we've got our loading indicator as an observable. And that means our form, if we want to display it on our form itself, we need to make this an observer. So what we can do is, once again, just say export default and say observer, and then surround the function in parentheses and close this off down here. And then what we need to do is take a look inside our form as well and see what we were doing here. So we've got our handle submit method and we've got our create or edit activity. And what we'll need to do is bring in the other functions that we created. So we need our create activity, we need our update activity, and we need our loading indicator also from our activity store. And then what we can do is come down to our handle submit method. And we've slightly changed the way we're doing this now. We're checking, or we're adding the ID for the activity inside our store. So what we need to do is check to see if we have an activity.id, and if we do, then we know that we're updating an activity, so we can pass in update activity and pass in the activity, and if not, then we know that we're creating an activity, and once again we can pass in the activity there. And we've got one problem. And let's see what this is. Can't find name submitting. Ah, yes. And that's because we've got our loading indicator here now. So we can swap submitting for loading inside the activity form as well. And we should get a clean bill of health. So let's go back to our browser, give the page a refresh. And let's first of all try and edit an activity. So we've got our past activity. In my case, it's past activity 11. Let's add an extra 1 onto this and click submit. We see our loading indicator, we see the selected activity has been updated, and also in our dashboard we can see it here as well. And if we click on view, then everything looks good there, and cancel. And let's just make sure we can create a new activity. So let's just say test MobX, create, and say test, and we'll give it a category of music and pick any random dates. And say test, and I'll click on submit, and we get our activity created there as well, and it should be in our list here. Perfect. So what we'll take a look at next is deleting an activity.